Today is Monday, November 18th, and this is Spring Office Hours Season 3, Episode 39, Modern Server-Side Applications with HTMX and Spring ViewComponent. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and colleague, DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how's it going?
It is a great day to be a Spring developer. HTMX is hot. It's all the rage. Everybody's using it. It's amazing. And I just saw a nice little feedback, a little use case from our guest today about how much code they were able to throw away. And that's always fun. I can't think of many things that are more fun than throwing away code.
Yeah, that's always fun. Getting that code base reduced. The less code you have, the less code you have to maintain, less bugs you probably have. So,
that sounds great. I want that.
That's fun. That is on my list to talk to him about. But before we get into it, how have you been? What have you been up to?
It's busy. You know, today it's a big week. We got things coming.
We do.
And I'm excited about it.
We do.
So
we have, this is going to be a 2-show week for us.
We're going to have 2 shows. That's how big it is. We're going to have 2 shows this week. I think, we don't do that very often, but this deserves it.
What is happening this week?
Spring Boot 3.4.
Ooh.
Spring Boot 3.4. It's right around the corner. It's cooking. It's almost perfect.
We get a new release of Spring Boot every 6 months, and this happens to be this week.
We're so lucky.
Yeah,
it's just nice. Like the Spring engineers, the Spring team, they just do this for us. They're always giving us new stuff. We didn't ask for it. We didn't deserve it either. They just keep on giving us all this amazing stuff.
We mentioned it last week, so I'm not letting any cats out of the bag. But we're going to talk to Phil on Thursday. So Phil Webb, Spring team extraordinaire. I'm excited to talk to him, learn about what's new in Spring Boot 3.4, and hopefully get everybody else excited about getting the bits and getting their hands on it and having fun with it. So
absolutely. It's going to be great.
If you are here in the live stream, and we have a lot of you here, so we appreciate that. If you're here in the live stream, do us a big favor and get your questions in. We have a wonderful guest today who is going to help us answer questions, but if it's not on topic, we can still try and get to those if we have time. But we do this live stream every Monday from 1 to 2 Eastern. Sometimes we change it up, but usually that's a good time to catch us. And if you're here in the live stream, we encourage you to ask your questions. If you are unable to join the live stream, you can catch the replay on the Spring Developer YouTube channel. We also go ahead and take this and turn this into a podcast so you can get this wherever you get your podcasts. And speaking of the podcast has been doing really good, DaShaun. We are on season 3 here. We've had a lot of fun this year. We're almost at the end of season 3, heading into season 4. It's been really good to see the kind of podcast numbers growing. But hey, if you're out there, do me a big favor and leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. That really helps us out. All right. With that, I think I'm going to bring on our guest because I want to get right into it. We have a lot to talk about. I'm excited to bring to the stage, the virtual stage, the one and only Mr. Thomas Schuehly.
Yeah.
Thomas, how's it going, my friend?
It's going good. How are you?
Good. You're usually here in Spring Office Hours every week. I see you in the comments answering questions, but now you're here joining us live. So I can't thank you enough for being here. We're gonna have a lot of fun today. But for those
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, for those who don't know you, Thomas, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a software developer. I work a lot on open source software. I'm also indie hacking, and my open source projects actually come from my own projects. So I'm using my open source libraries in my own projects, and that's why I develop them. And yeah, I work in a little software company in Vienna, where I'm also doing HTMX and Spring ViewComponent. One of the few who actually use this stack. So yeah.
Cool. And I know, how long have you been kind of in the develop? I know you're kind of like recently new to, how long have you been a developer?
I've started with my apprenticeship in 2019.
Okay.
And I was also freelancing for a long time. So probably 4 years.
The only reason I bring that up is because there was a time where I didn't know Thomas. And then all of a sudden, Thomas came on the scene, and I see, you did your first talk at I think Spring I/O was like your first talk, maybe?
Yeah.
And then I see your conference everywhere. So I'm like, this is like really awesome to see somebody kind of new to development get their first kind of big talk, and then I see you everywhere, and that's really
I'm not saying that Spring Office Hours had anything to do with it, but I'm not saying that.
Of course they had something to do with it.
Yeah, that was really cool to see. So all right, I think a good place to start is just with HTMX in general. Can you kind of talk about what HTMX is at a high level for those out there who don't know what it is?
So at a high level, it's really about interacting with the browser in a declarative way, but don't use JavaScript, and instead use declarative attributes to swap the HTML in the browser when the client does something. And I've recently at DevFox, I watched a talk about platform interfaces. And it was like, HTMX is the better platform interface for the web. Because like normally you can only interact with the browser with JavaScript. But like with HTMX, you can actually really use it fully. Because if you use standard HTML, it only has a form attribute, and you can do only full page reloads. And HTMX allows you to do partial page updates. That's really what's it all about.
That's great. It kind of full circle for me. You know, it reminds me a lot of early in my career. I got started with JavaScript. Didn't really like it. I would use like an IDE to like generate a lot of the JavaScript that I was using because I didn't know how to write JavaScript, and it was kind of a mess at the beginning. And then some things started to turn around, and oh man, I'm drawing a blank now. What is the JavaScript framework that came along? Somebody help me. No, just the one that is still the most popular one out there that is used by WordPress. jQuery. Sorry, I was like drawing a blank for some reason. So yeah, so jQuery came along, and then I got really interested in like building web applications again because it kind of made it easy to do. And I kind of liken this to that because there are all these really great like component frameworks out there if you're building these like huge single page applications or monolithic enterprise applications. But if I just want to add like a little bit of interactivity to my application, I don't need to dive all into one of these frameworks. I can just like add a little bit of it. So what
you can also what's a common phrase is a transitional application. So part of your application is actually done with an SPA, but part of the application is done with an MVC style backend driven application. So you can do both, and it's really about what interactivity needs you have.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and I can always I always see it as like a good way to like get an MVP up and running too. So like maybe down the line, maybe it does turn into like some full-blown application. But right now I'm just like building out this one little feature and I need a little bit of interactivity and I don't want to overcomplicate things, right?
Well, we're actually in the process of getting into the weeds of it at my work because we're working full year now on our HTMX driven application.
Yep.
And I have to say, you can do so much with it. And the only real thing you can't really do is really high interactivity where you need a lot of local state. But for 95% of usages today, I think it's good enough.
Yep. And I'm going to put a link to Thomas's Twitter and kind of mention what DaShaun mentioned a little bit earlier. Thomas had a tweet there, basically said, I finished migrating an Angular application to HTMX org and Spring ViewComponent. We'll get into that in a little bit. You removed 5,376 lines of TypeScript, added 2,500 lines of Kotlin, 28% decrease in overall lines of code. And you went from 19 run dependencies to 2, which are just Alpine and HTMX. That is really cool to see. So kind of take us through that process. Like, how did that start out, and what did you find like throughout that process?
So actually, most of that migration was actually done by my colleague Christoph. He's working with me together at my work on HTMX and on our application. So I've mostly just reviewed it. But the thing about it is, with modern JavaScript frameworks like Angular, the application was in Angular 13. And I had a tweet a long time about it, where moving from Angular 13 to a recent Angular was like this whole, I don't know where the camera is, but it was like this giant list of stuff you had to do because they're constantly changing narratives and how to do stuff. And when I learned Angular, which was in 2020 and 2021, it was like, okay, you can do, you use RxJS, and now they're onto the next paradigm with signals. And I was, and also all the dependencies you have. Oh, they're depreciated, they're out of date. You have to use a new JavaScript library because it's not supported anymore, whatever, right? And so that's really, the migration was really all about, what's it called? Maintainability. Because like HTMX, the base principle of HTMX is so stupidly simple that you don't have to think about it. And there's not much to actually migrate in any form because it's so simple. And it's the same with Spring. And I'm like, why do I have these enterprise JavaScript frameworks, but they're not really enterprise because you have to migrate them every year to a new version that breaks half the stuff. So yeah, that's really most of the stuff. And I have to say, it was really most of the interactivity is really on the admin side. So it's not a beautiful UI. It's just some simple interactivity where it's actually my first freelance project where he can just, it's like little e-commerce categories and products and all that. So that's really mainly what it about.
Have you found like the move to HTMX? So when I talk about HTMX, again, kind of adding little like bits of interactivity on a page somewhere, have you found like migrating? I know your colleague did a lot of this, but have you found like in larger apps, there's like a line where HTMX is not enough, or is it really kind of fit all of your needs?
So it's probably not really from this migration, but from my daily work, is you can do so much because you can swap multiple things on a page as similarity at the same time. And as I said, you can just embed, for example, in my indie hacker project, I actually have embedded a React library directly next to an HTMX form, and the form actually updates the React library and re-renders it and just uses JavaScript events, because HTMX also integrates with JavaScript events. So you can do all of that. So you're not constrained in any way. If you need the high interactivity or you need React stuff, you can actually reach for it and use it for that parts of the application that you needed. I still have to look into that, but with Wim together, Wim de Blauw, he does the HTMX Spring Boot library. We've talked about at DevFox about how to integrate React and Spring Boot application. So you do the build inside the Spring Boot, and he did a blog post on that. I still have to look at that.
Yeah, I saw that actually.
All that.
Yeah. Yeah, Wim is great, by the way. If you haven't, for those of you out here who haven't checked out his book, he has a couple books on like time leaf and HTMX. Definitely check those out. So I guess that HTMX is a really good place to start. One other thing I wanted to talk about before we kind of get into like Spring ViewComponent was I kept hearing you standing on top of the mountain screaming about JTE, and I heard it, but I just, I have so many things that are on my plate of like, which do I learn next? And then the Spring Initializer added JTE as a templating option. So it got my attention then. I was like, all right, I got to learn this. I went and did a bunch of videos on it. Really, really like JTE as a template engine. But just for you, kind of I know what my thoughts are on it, but I want to hear from you kind of why you got into JTE and what you love about it so much.
So actually, my indie hacking project, which was also the project which was the cause of Spring ViewComponent, I still use ThymeLeaf there. I still plan to migrate to JTE because the compile time safety is such a huge benefit, and especially if you migrate stuff. So one pattern I really like is to use constants to use as URLs. So you can, for example, if you use HTMX and you have an HX post, you can just reference the static constant in your JTE. And that way you can just, with Command B, you can tap around your application and see, okay, this endpoint is used in this template, and this template, and this component, and it's really, really, really simple.
Yep.
And especially if you refactor your application, I currently feel that because I'm currently on a larger refactor in my indie hacker application, PhotoQuest, is you with ThymeLeaf, you're not really warned about what properties are actually available and all that. Like Spring ViewComponent makes it a bit easier because you have to define a context, what variables are accessible, and IntelliJ actually has like a helper for that. So you can see it, but you don't get any warnings. So that's really not a good thing about ThymeLeaf.
Yeah, that was my biggest thing. Like you go into a template and you're just not really sure like what is available in the context to you. Like when I look at a JTE template, I'm like, oh, there's a user object there. I know what that user object is, but I also get IntelliSense on it now. Like I know what fields are available on that user object. So that just makes it easier. It makes it easier for me to write a template, but it also makes it easier when I have to go update something. I know I'm not guessing. I know it's there.
It's also a lot easier to like integrate your own stuff into it because like with JTE, you can just define a content object, which is renderable. You can just say, okay, please render this string or whatever, right? For example, if you define your own URL, I have an URL utility class, and if that's inside a JTE expression, it just calls the build method on the Spring URI component builder, and that way you have like a fluent builder for URIs directly in your template, and it's awesome, really. So, for example, for what's it called, path variables, you can just do, okay, I have the URI from a request mapping, and you can just say, okay, now insert this variable, which is currently, for example, in my loop. For example, to delete an item, you can say, okay, delete or do a delete on order /1, and the 1 is actually from your for loop, the index, and you can't really do that with Thymeleaf that easily.
Yeah. As I started doing those videos too, I got a lot of comments like, well, can you do this in JT or this in JT? I haven't really found anything you can't do. I mean, it's just a template engine, right? You can pretty much do anything in any template engine. Some just make it easier to do than others. Have you come across anything where you're like, oh, it's not really the same as Thymeleaf. I can't do that, or
the thing is, it's so low level. So
yeah.
in practice, you do fors, you do ifs. You do property expressions. But
Right.
you don't need anything else. It's the same thing about HTMX and about JTE. It's so low level that you can do everything with it because you're not constrained in any way.
Right. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to use. I'm trying to find more reasons to use it. In fact, we'll be talking next year at a couple conferences on kind of the front end stuff, and now I want to talk more about like HTMX and JTE. So cool. If you're joining us live, please get your questions in. Let us know if you have any questions. I've seen a lot of comments in here.
Yeah, Carson is also here, the creator of HTMX. He's under the MSU CSI CI instructor.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, Thomas, this is Carson. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Carson.
I still need to meet him. Like everyone I've talked to who worked with Carson already said it's an awesome guy. So maybe sometime I have to invite him to Germany.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Okay, so that's HTMX. That's a little bit about JTE. We can kind of put those together. I want to talk about Spring ViewComponent because this is something I have not had a chance to use. I've watched a couple of presentations from different conferences that you've done. I think I watched you did a live stream with Josh at one point when you were working on a lot of the issues that were going on with the native stuff, but I think that's all kind of worked out. So I've seen some things, I just haven't used it yet. But for those who don't know what Spring ViewComponent is, can you give us a little bit of a high-level overview of kind of what problems it solves?
Yeah. So Spring ViewComponent is kind of the component level libraries that you use in Angular or React just for the backend for Spring. So what you can define UI components in Spring, which also means you can define, you can use backend patterns to actually compose your UI. Because with standard Spring MVC, it's just template based. So you say, okay, please render me this template. But one of the thing is, you don't really need to know what properties are available in your model. For example, in Thymeleaf, you can nest templates and use them in other templates. But the problem is really when you use parameters in this template and nested templates, it's not clear. There's no API to actually call these templates. And so Spring ViewComponent is just a Spring way of looking at view components, so UI components. And in essence, Spring ViewComponent is a Spring Bean, which offers a method to render it. And it actually returns a view context. And this view context is the context which properties are available for the template. And how it actually works is in your Java folder, you have your normal Spring Beans. And for example, I can create a home view component, which is just for my homepage. And then I can say, okay, I have a homepage component, and I have a homepage component.jte. So I have a Java class, and I always have a template class. And in the template class, I can use the properties from the view context, which the render method of the home view component actually specifies. And that's kind of a way to really, what's it called? To have like high cohesion between your template and the actual point where you use the template. So it's kind of layer between your controllers. So I mostly say, okay, your controller is responsible for routing. The view component is responsible for the rendering. And the service layer is responsible for getting the data. And so the view component aggregates the data for rendering. Because in a template, it you're cross-domain. So you need data from multiple domains, multiple data sources, for example. And you don't have to have a service that specs that all together, but the view component actually calls different services and gets all data.
And this is opposed to, like, instead of in a controller, we normally get a model, and then I take a model and I may reach out to like this service to get a list of users and this service to get a list of reviews. And then I shove those into the model, I put that into the template, and now in the template I have access to those. But as you said, you don't really know what you have access to. So in your case, you have a view component that now renders that template, and you know the view component is there and what objects or what methods you have available based on that particular type.
So in the controller, you actually just auto-wire the view component because it's a Spring Beam. And then you call, most often you call the render method. You can also have multiple render method, and then returns a view context. And as you know, Spring makes it really easy to say, okay, how to render a particular object. Normally it's just an object is, what's it called, serialized to JSON. So JAX does the serialization. Or if you return a model or a view, or a model and view, it puts it to Thymeleaf or JTE or whatever. And so Spring View Component just says, okay, I have a view context interface here. Please get me the template. Okay, it's in the same package, so that's a convention. It's in the same package with the same name. So home view component.jte, and then render that. And the nice thing is really you can also say, okay, for example, I have a navigation view component, and you can say, please render the navigation view component, and then have a view context as parameter, and then say, okay, please render the navigation view context with the home view component inside of it. And so that's really how you can do multiple things with that, and it's really flexible. So for example, one use case I have is our navigation bar. It's actually just defined by what view component are available. So we implement our view component implements a navigation view, and then say, okay, the navigation view interface has a method get navigation info. And then in my navigation component, I just say, okay, please auto-wire me all implementations of the navigation view interface. And then I can say, okay, loop over this and then render a view component for each navigation info, for example. So these are really backend patterns you can use for UI.
Yeah, and you said from a front end side, I haven't used Angular in a while, but I know there is like that idea of a component. Is that what kind of inspired you to build this? Is your work in Angular?
Yeah. So I started, my first freelance project was in Angular, and that's really where all these ideas came, really how to structure it. It's really very similar to the Angular 13 or 12 or whatever I learned. So you define context, and then you can access variables and there.
Awesome. All right. I think we have some answers to some of these questions, but somebody had asked, is View Component an HTML rendering engine? And the same person asked the same question, like, is it like Templ, T-E-M-P-L for Go? And then Wim came in later and said no, but I just
it's just wraps around the template engine. So currently you can use JTE or Thymeleaf, and because these ones are the two ones I use, and it just wraps around it, because in the end it's actually just simple. It's just an aspect from AOP which wraps around it and says, okay, this I want to render this Java file or this view context that's inside a Java class, and then I say, okay, this is the package, so I now need to get the path of the same template, and then just puts it in a model and view control, in a model and view container, it's called, and it's so lightweight. So yeah.
So your experience in Angular, and then you move over to the Spring side, and you realize that, like, I really like that pattern. I don't see a pattern for this on the Spring side, and I'm tired of like shoving everything into a model and then having no idea what is available to me over on that side. So how did you get started with this project? Was it was it based on some things going on at work, or was it just curiosity of like trying to get something out there? What got you inspired to do that?
So my first project, the one we recently ported over to Angular, that was my first freelance project, and I've used Spring in the backend and Angular on the front end. And after a while, I was so tired because you had to duplicate everything. You had to duplicate the models. Okay, I have the backend JPA entity, and now I need the same thing in TypeScript. Why the hell do I need this, right? So that's really where it came in. And then when I started with my indie hacking project, it's called PhotoQuest. It's like a wedding gallery with funny tasks that the guests of the wedding do. And that's my side project. And there I started with TimeLeaf. Just read on Wim's blog, how to do it and all that. Yeah. And then also talked for, I think it was on Twitter a while, like in 2022 or something. I've talked with Oliver and Wim in a tweet, and it was like, why isn't there anything like a view component? Because there's actually a view component for Ruby on Rails. Why is there nothing for Spring? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And so that's really where it came from. And actually, I wanted to go to Spring I/O 2023. I was like, I'm way too cheap for these tickets. I don't want to pay for the tickets. So the weekend before the CFP closes, I was like, oh yeah, there was this idea from Oliver or Wim, I don't know, about having like components for Spring. And I was like, well, I can do that. And so on the weekend, I was like, implemented the MVP for that. And then on Sunday, submitted to the CFP for the first time. On Monday was the last day for CFP mission. So yeah.
I've always found that submitting to like a talk to a conference really kind of pushes me to like work on something a little bit more. Like I'm really interested in this thing, but I don't have time for it. So I submit a CFP and like, okay, now I got to work on this.
Yeah, you're first. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So where you mentioned PhotoQuest a couple of times. What's the URL for that? Just so I have the right one.
PhotoQuest.wedding.
PhotoQuest.wedding.
Yeah, it's all in German. So
I just want to share it out.
Yeah. So I still have to like port it someday to English, but I first want to capture the German market.
For sure. Okay, I think I got a question here. Is Spring's View component an attempt to create React-like components in Spring by leveraging HTMX?
So I can only answer partially because I looked like 2 times at React code and I was like, oh, I don't want to work on that. So I was always sticking to Angular, but I think React components are really similar. But yeah, in essence, they're like components that you know from all the JavaScript framework, just from a server-side rendering perspective. And the cool thing is with Spring ViewComponent, you can just say, okay, I have an endpoint which swaps out some part of the page because like the data is refreshed. You could just say, okay, I auto-wire this component and I call a random method on it and whoop, it's updated. And that's really the point of it. Yeah.
Awesome. I got another question here, a slightly weird question. There are no weird questions. Don't worry about that. In a JSP heavy application, is there a good modern replacement for Apache tiles?
This is an amazing question because just recent conversations with our ecosystem, Apache tiles has come up as people are trying to modernize. And the explanation that Thomas just gave about how I can have this React or the Spring View component that calls another Spring View component. I can have this kind of nested and be aware. In my head, as he was explaining that, I was like, oh, here we go. I've got a path forward for some of these Apache tiles conversations. So Thomas might not be old enough to remember Apache tiles. I don't think Apache tiles was even a thing anymore when Thomas was born. He's quite young. So this is for a different crowd, maybe a different answer. Thomas, have you ever done anything with Apache tiles?
No.
Have you ever heard of Apache tiles?
God bless you.
I've read it somewhere sometime.
I've seen
but
it.
like,
I saw it, over on SourceForge somewhere. But yeah, it's okay. I think, based on what I've heard, based on what I understand, I think for Abdarsh, I hope I'm saying that right. I think your question is, or the answer to your question is, yeah, this does look like a really good replacement. If you're doing Apache tiles, if you're having to maintain things using Apache tiles, I think this, not just HTMX, but the Spring ViewComponent approach is going to be a really nice,
Yeah, and
to
it's
push.
like you don't have to go out and rewrite your entire application, right? If you're going to move to something like Angular or React, like you're rewriting that entire application in one of these front-end frameworks. In this instance, you're already in the Java Spring ecosystem. I want to create a new page or a new set of pages. Let me just bring in HTMX, JTE, Spring ViewComponent, and start to build out some new pages using modern technologies without having to rewrite our entire application. Because as much as we always want to lean towards that, right? It's really hard to rewrite entire legacy applications in new frameworks. It takes a lot of money and takes a lot of, programming power to do so, and buy-ins from the upper management, which is never easy.
yeah.
Cool. I guess another thing I wanted to find out was, I'm not sure like what the current version is of Spring ViewComponent. Where are we currently? What have you been working on lately? What are you looking at as far as the future goes with Spring ViewComponent?
So the current version is 0.8.4. Actually, I have to put a new release on GitHub. I always forget that. But yeah, it's so recently I've actually simplified a lot. So previously I had my own annotation processor for doing the compilation and all that, and the checking. And I have simplified that. So currently it's just the Maven build step just copies the files into your resources folder. And so currently it's like in a really stable kind of thing. Currently I'm working, over the past few months, I'm not really active in it because I have so much other fun stuff to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the next thing is functional endpoints, what I want to work on. And actually created an issue in the HTMX Spring Boot repository, because I was like, why do that only in my own library? We can do that in HTMX Spring Boot, because you can actually use it with normal MVC as well. And so the idea is to kind of have a full stack framework, to make Spring full stack framework by having to, so actually using references instead of referencing, okay, I have to write hx post and then say, okay, the static reference to the user endpoint, for example. Mm-hmm. You instead say, okay, I have a user endpoint. I now want to call this user endpoint directly in the template. Yep. And as also also do all the swapping, what parts of the application need to be swapped. You can also do that automatically. And yeah.
So if the user endpoint changes in the controller at some point, then you don't need to like change it everywhere.
You don't need a controller anymore.
Right.
So for
Yeah.
routing, you have a controller endpoint, but for local interactivity, you don't need a user endpoint. For example, if you submit a form, what I'm currently often doing is annotating the view component with a controller annotation for the local HTMX interaction. Maybe I can even I think Kat Edelweiss asked for some code samples. I can also
if you want to show some code up, we can describe that to our podcast audience for you. But yeah, I think it would be cool to like just see an example of this. So yeah, if you want to share your screen, I can put us into share mode. Let's do this.
It's all incumbent IntelliJ. So that's, for example, for my HTMX Spring workshop. That's also available at htmx.tschuehly.de. And here, for example, is a simple example. So here you have the get mapping to the user management path, which in this case is just /. And then you say, okay, call the layout component, call the render method on it, and then pass in the user management component as parameter. So the cool thing is now we can navigate here. So I can just go to the render method.
Oh, nice.
I get a view context as parameter. And what now happens is the same thing I described earlier, is our navigation is actually created by auto-wiring all view components that implement the page interface. So here we auto-wire the page list, and we say, okay, please get me the navigation item from each page. So if we look at here, page is just a simple interface with a navigation item record. And we can see here we have two pages currently with a group management component and a user management component. And you can see here the navigation item returned by the group management component has a display name and a URI. So you actually have all the URLs aesthetically. So there's no fussing about, okay, I call this URL in some template. You don't have all that fuzziness. It's all static variables.
Yep. As I'm looking at your code structure here, I'm definitely getting flashbacks of Angular development. Seeing like your user management create edit table. Now it's coming back to me now.
So that's but it's cohesive. It's much more cohesive rather than having, for example, the template somewhere in the resources folders,
right,
and calling and using this template from 10 different controllers, for example.
Yep.
If you want to reuse it,
everything's right there, right?
Yeah, everything is right there.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this with, like, structuring your code, right? Using package by feature instead of package by layer, because when you go into package by feature, everything I'm doing with the user is right there. Now I can organize my code that way. I kind of like this there too. So, oh, we got a comment from Jitter Ted. Sorry I'm late. Was on a podcast. Go HTMX and Thomas. Absolutely.
Nice. Thank you.
Hey, Ted. So how does the JTE? So normally when I use JTE, again, I'm kind of new to it. I put everything in a JTE folder, but you're saying the templates go right next to my view components.
Yeah,
did you say
exactly?
Something ultimately pushes that into like the resource folder at like compilation time, or how does that work?
It's just what's it called? A Gradle configuration. So here you just say with JTE, you just say source directory, source main Java.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, so it's really simple. And kind of another nice thing about it is, for example, I've only talked about, okay, you can say you only have one render method, but you can have multiples. For example, here we have a paginated table, which is called. So here in the user table, here we use the hx request annotation from Vim's HTMX Spring Boot library. We say only call this endpoint when it's an HTMX request. And here you can see, okay, we have a page parameter in our path. And then we say, okay, get me the page and pass that to the user table component. And now here we say, okay, we pass in the current page. We get the page of users from the user service. We then call the user row component.render method for each user in the stream, and then collect them as a list. And then we use something I call utility view components. In this case, it's a list component, which is stupidly simple. It just has an var argument as parameter, and it just loops over all view contexts we get passed in, which means they're rendered under each other. So we call the list component.render method. We pass in the user rows, the user row component, which we just rendered. And then we can also do, at the end of the user rows, we have an infinite load component. And in the end, we return, if the current page is 0, so we're on the first page, we render the whole user table with all the structure, or we just return the table body. And Here you can see the user table context that implements a view context, which is our interface. And we define one parameter on there, which is the user table body. And I can just show you the infinite load component. It has just one. Parameter. It's called the next page. So what page I want to get. And here you can see we can just, with IntelliJ, we can just select open file. And we can also really easily navigate to the template. So here you can see the whole infinite load mechanic. We have an hxget. Then we say it's an HTMX URI. And that's just a little utility method. So we say, please make a request to the get user table, which is user-table/page, and then get the next page from the view context, the infinite load context, which in this case would be 2 for the second page. And then we say, we want to trigger this HTMX call, the HTTP call, when it intersects in the DOM, so when it's visible in the DOM. And then we want to swap the outer HTML, which means when we scroll down, this table row element with the HTMX attributes gets actually replaced by the user table body.
Right.
And I think it's kind of stupidly simple how easy you do stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then for all of my static assets, my images, my CSS, that still goes in like the resource directory. Right?
Yeah, that's just in your resources. It's
perfect.
I have a question for you, Thomas. And this actually comes from the chat. They are trying to generate a generic 404 or 500 error page. So in TimeLeaf, we can just create a 404 HTML, and that'll get used every time I run into a 404 error, and the same for 500. How do you do that with JTE and HTMX?
So you just I don't know if I have one here, but
you don't have to show the code. Explain it.
Yeah, you just use a controller advice. So here I've created an exception advice. In this case, you would handle not the info exception, but the page not found or resource not found exception from Spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can say, okay, I want to render a message component. For example, here, in this case, I would just render a toast. Here we also say, okay, we can select the toast container.
And for those who don't speak front end, toasts are like the little message.
The little bubbles at the top, like the messages that pop open. And yeah. And so what I've also done is like create a lot of utility functions. For example, here we're using the values from Wim de Blauwe's HTMX Spring Boot library. So here we say, okay, the retarget method on HTMX util just sets the header with the HX retarget value, and then the CSS selector we passed in. And as you can see, with one look, we can see what happens and where it happens, because we can see that it's swapped into the toast container, the toast container with an inner HTML swap. We don't even have to look at the template because it's so stupidly simple.
Yeah.
And again, we can just navigate. Okay, here is my layout component. Here I have the toast container ID. And when I click again on it, I can go to the layout component. Here it is. 2 clicks, and I'm from where I catch my exception and where I show the message, right? And that's really the main thing why I'm so excited about JTE. It's just the ease of use, especially with the IntelliJ plugin.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, I'm going to switch us back here just to get us back in here. But I would say, I think for a long time, especially in the Java world, we were using JSPs, and then we kind of moved into this template era. And, when a lot of these front-end frameworks came in, the Angulars, the Reacts, the Vues, we started just moving everything into these front-end frameworks. And that's great, but it's not the only solution out there, right? So I'm excited to see kind of as the title of this episode is Modern Server-Side Applications with HTMX and Spring ViewComponent. There's a right tool for the right job, right? Maybe you have a team in place that can build React apps and talk to a Spring application. Maybe you have Spring developers and you want to build everything right in Spring and get a lot of this modern functionality without, being a JavaScript or a TypeScript wizard. So what would you, I know your answer, but I just want to kind of get it. What would you say to people who say like, oh, we're not building server-side applications in Spring anymore. We do that using component frameworks.
Well, you have a component framework for Spring ViewComponent.
There you go.
So you
Exactly.
you have all the tools available. So it's really about, I think I'm past the step, okay, how do I use it? It's not on the step, how can I even make it better? So how can we integrate it better? What patterns exist there? Like it's really uncharted territory. We can maybe look at something like Hotwire or something to think about, okay, how can we integrate HTMX and Spring Boot further together? Because it's the thing, HTMX is just an interface. It's just a better interface for the browser. How to do interactivity with the browser. And we can leverage that and build on top of it. So build your own domain-specific components, build your own domain-specific utilities. You always think about, okay, you can also do, for example, declarative UI. I've discussed that with DaShaun already. What we're currently doing at work, we're having declarative UIs, which have an accessor, what part of the entity graph we actually need. And what we're doing is we're building an entity graph from the form definitions. So for example, I say I have an input of type text, and there I want to display the person.user.username, for example, right? And then from this dot notation, I can say I can construct my SQL, and with JPA it's even easier. And then I don't have any overfetching. Like the whole thing that GraphQL solves, you don't need that because you're on the server anyway. It's more secure. It's faster. There's so many reasons why you should render on your server and not on your browser.
Yeah, I saw, I can't remember the exact video, but there was like a reaction on YouTube, like, oh, here's this old server rendered application and it's so fast. Why is it so fast? It's like, yes, there's, like you said, you went from 19 or 20 dependencies down to 2. And it's not surprising that you can create some pretty fast applications.
Yeah, that was a question from Carson. He was asking like, hey, on the Angular to HTMX export, how did the end user perceive performance hold up? Like, was it still sharp? And I think I know the answer to this one.
The thing is, it's like a backend application. It's like a back office application which doesn't really have any performance requirements. But the thing is, you always have to think about the JavaScript needs to do the same network calls to get the same result. And HTMX sometimes, or like HTML, sometimes faster because you render them directly and you don't have to hop between JSON. And the thing is, the other thing is if you have to collect data from multiple data sources. For example, when you have to call multiple microservices to aggregate the data, and when you do that on the server, it's much faster than when you do it on your on the browser.
Right. Yeah. Because you got to call all these different endpoints, right?
This is your chance to convert. In the chat, the only thing stopping me moving from Timeleaf to JTE is there's no way that I can see that enables me to use Spring MVC's binding result to show form validation errors. Any tips? Are you familiar with the binding result?
I know that that there's like I didn't look at it yet. I know in Timeleaf they use that often. I never looked at it. We just use a toast.
Yep.
It's so simple. We just say, okay, aggregate all validations I currently have, and then show that in a toast. But you can also do like out of bounds swap with that. So you could say, okay, with Spring component, you could just say, okay, what components through the exception aggregate that, and then automatically out-of-bounds swap them to the correct IDs.
Yes, nothing preventing us from using JTE with Spring MVC. The binding result is an interface provided by Spring MVC, so you're just getting in that binding result interface. You're just getting those errors, the validation that's just being shared with you as an object, and you could do that swap. So you could still, I think, leverage that. It shouldn't be a reason for stopping, not using.
I think the current problem with JTE, the creator doesn't use Spring. So we actually have to just convert the guy who maintains and creates it to use Spring. So he's more invested into Spring and makes the Spring support better. I've recently contributed to it to have like a better live reload with JTE. But the thing is, my time is also very limited. So there's just contribute to JTE. It's the Spring MVC is actually pretty simple once you understand it. Like you have to walk through the dispatcher servlet a few hundred times or something, and sometime you get it. But
that's awesome. What have you been getting a lot of kind of support or feedback from the community on Spring ViewComponent, and what have you heard of others using it?
Yeah, so there are a couple of people using it. I don't know if any people use it productively or just like for pet projects. A lot of people after my conference talks and my workshops actually approached me and said, okay, I have an old Timeleaf application and we were thinking about migrating that to a single page application. But with HTMX and with Spring ViewComponent, you don't need that because you can use the same structure, patterns, and all that without having to switch over.
Right.
And so it's really the main thing is really either these old Timeleaf projects that, or I don't know who uses the other templating languages.
There are some good ones out there. I know our good friend Dave Sire is a huge fan of Mustache, so he's been asking me to like take a little bit of a dive into some of the Mustache stuff. So I'm gonna do that soon. But and I was a big Groovy template person back in the day when I was using Groovy and Grails for stuff. So there's some other great ones out there. But
I actually chatted with the creator of JStudio. It's like the statically compiled Mustache.
Yeah, exactly.
About integrating JStudio into Spring ViewComponent, but it's like time. That would be another thing. And like, if I don't have a reason to use it because like JT is so nice, I probably won't have time to integrate that.
I can say this about your repository. The Spring ViewComponent repository on GitHub already has 192 stars.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo.
Like, that's awesome. I can also say that for our live stream, this episode today has the most live viewers that we've had all year.
Yeah. Nice. No, I think ever.
So I think that I think we're doing something here. I think it's got legs. I based on the conversations and the questions, I think it's going places.
I have another question here. If a company has only back-end Java developers, we found it very useful to use Vaadin, which is great for CRMs, back office applications. Have you done any comparison with this tool, and what is the advantage of using Spring ViewComponent?
So I actually talked a lot with the Vaadin guys at DevVox, but the thing is Spring ViewComponent and HTMX is a lot lower level. So Vaadin is a single-page application, and all the interactivity is all hidden from you. And Spring ViewComponent doesn't do that. So HTMX with Spring ViewComponent is a lot lower level, which makes it more understandable if you have issues. But there's a lot of benefits for Vaadin. I didn't use it much yet, but sometime maybe I have time to dive into it. But it's more low level. That's like the main thing, really. You have more control how the DOM looks like. You're working closer to the HTML. So for example, if you have design libraries or designer who works in HTML, who does HTML, or you have an HTML library that you use in React or something, it's pretty easy to just copy paste, or something like Shatsy, and you can just copy paste it over and in your view components. It's like the thing with the migration from Angular to Spring ViewComponent. It was just you have the same components. You just say, okay, instead of a TypeScript file, I have a Java, or in this case, a Kotlin file, which is infinitely better than a TypeScript file. And so easy, right?
Yep. And I would say, I think for me, if you've ever like wanted to build out a page and like, oh, I saw this fancy form where I clicked submit and went away and did an animation and then showed something. But if that seems like really overwhelming to you, because now I got to like learn the whole front end tooling space and like figure out how to get that to work, this is a great kind of step towards that without having to like figure all of that out, right? So you can do some really cool stuff. As the title of this says, build some modern server-side applications with both HTMX and server and ViewComponent. So
the thing is, you can also do is just my designer just adjust the HTML, so I don't have to. So all the animations and all that stuff, I don't really care about, because like when I do a feature, it's complete when it's working, not when it looks great. So you can just say, if you're working together with the designer who's actually not only fluent in Figma, but can also do some HTML, and we use Tailwind, which it's a nice fit. You can just work together on that much easier.
Yeah. Ted brings up a point about the testing. You went down this path already, Thomas. Like the idea that now that I've got something like Spring ViewComponent, I can actually test the generation. I can test what's being rendered and validate that, hey, it's doing its job.
Yeah, so you can independently. That's also on the roadmap for my company, is to have like a style book kind of interface where you can test each component individually, input the properties live in the web browser, and then test it. And also the end-to-end tests you can do individual component based. Just I used HTML unit for that.
Nice.
And so it's possible. There's so much opportunity.
This is great, Thomas.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think Dan is correct. I think we've had the live stream. I think is the most that we've ever had on any one of our episodes. So like, thank you for joining.
Thomas is number one.
Yeah, officially. But thank you so much for your time. And I hope that this isn't the last that we get to hang out together.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure we're going to be looking for big things from you coming in the near future.
Yeah, what's coming for you next year? Do you have any conferences lined up yet? Are you going to be speaking anywhere?
So I'm not planning to speak on any. Next year, I'm really focusing on my side project for the Quest.
Nice.
I'm going to Spring IO, so if anyone's at Spring IO, hit me up.
Awesome.
Already booked my flat there. So,
oh, you did that last year, if I'm not mistaken, right after the conference.
I did that. So awesome. But I'm going to a few Java user groups, I think. Been invited to Frankfurt, Darmstadt, Saarbrücken. I think they all, when I talked to them, they wanted to invite me there. So yeah.
Awesome. For anybody who wants to get in touch with you, how can they find you on the internet, or even Spring ViewComponent? How can they reach out to you as far as like questions or issues? How can they follow up with you after this?
Yeah. So I'm on my blog, tschuehly.de. Probably put a link in there because TSCSCHUAEHLY. I really need to change. Next year I'm getting married, so I'm going to change my last name. It's much easier next year. So Schuehly on Twitter, on my website, on LinkedIn, all places really.
Awesome. We will go ahead and get that in the show notes as well. So if you check out the podcast or the replay of this, we will have those in the show notes. All right. With that, Thomas, again, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to hang out with us. I know we have different time zones, so we appreciate you coming on with us. And for those out there, go ahead and check out HTMX and Spring ViewComponent, and let Thomas know how great his work is. We would appreciate that.
Yeah. On my repo, I would really appreciate it if we could reach 200 stars.
Yes, let's go star that repo.
Let's see how long that takes.
There's enough people here to get that to 200. Let's go.
You know what to do.
Yeah. All right. With that, again, we will see you later this week on Spring Office Hours as we have a second episode coming up with Phil Webb on Thursday for Spring Boot 3.5. 4. With that, thanks everyone. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.